Well, hello, one and all. Good to see everybody this afternoon.
Hi, Best Ones.
Did you want to
Hello.
respond?
We're ready to talk continuous learning, aren't we? As we continuously learn. I'm Beth Swans, a digital learning consultant at Grantwood AEA. Well, hello, one and all.
Oh.
Oh, and we have an echo.
Me, my bad. That was me.
I'm Corey Rogers.
I'm Amber Bridge.
Mindy Carney. Are we starting to look familiar? Anybody tired of seeing us yet?
Need to move in different places in the house, or like do a little house tour as we go through these chats together.
That's exactly right.
I have seen Mindy's house in different places, so that's kind of a fun thing to do.
Yeah, I'm not hiding today. I'm out in the open.
Well, we want to welcome all of you, and if you would let us know in the chat what your own roles are in your school, teachers, administrators, librarians, any whatever your role is, we'd love to hear from you. This really is a chat. So many of our Facebook Lives have been focused on a tool and kind of how could you use that tool and what do you do and step by step. This is more, well, I guess it's a tool we created, right? We could call it that, our continuous learning document. We want to kind of give you an overview of how we got to that place and what's going on. And you'll be able to hear from each of us. We're going to highlight different phases of the learning document. So we'll kind of go from there.
All right.
Feel free
I'm gonna hold on. Let me share here, right, Beth? I think I've got to. Let me find my right tab and start sharing. I'm gonna find the right tab and then share my screen because I'm a professional, and that seems like something a professional would do.
Not seeing the 10,000 tabs like I have on mine.
Yeah, right. Okay, I think I'm ready.
So while Mindy is finding that document, I follow a lot of different people in blogs, and this last week I came across an article, and it was written. I want to say who wrote it because I want to give them credit here. This was written by Bill Summers, and the title of it was a blog post called "New Rule: Navigate VUCA with Habits of Mind." So I kind of have one foot in the blended and personalized learning world. So we talk a lot about habits of mind. So I was interested in what VUCA was. I hadn't heard that term before. It stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think it's a perfect explanation of the world we're living in right now. We don't know what comes next, and that's a very hard kind of place to hang out. What I do know, after having been in education for more than 30 years, is that when we as teachers are stressed, I think it's more than just teachers, but I'm using education because that's where we live. When we as teachers are stressed, we tend to pull in all new practices and we go back to what we know. We go back to whatever we feel like we've got the most control with, what has worked in the past. Well, we're living in a time when there is no what has worked in the past because this has never been before. So it makes it really tough to know exactly where to go next and how to go. So our team of digital learning consultants have kind of worked on this continuous learning guide. We've worked on it as a way to help us frame where we think the process is and kind of where we can provide supports for teachers in different ways. It starts out with really a focus of both to administrators, leadership team. Here are some things that we think as an administration or leadership team you need to address. And then we go into educators, and we want to spend the most of our time today in the educators realm. This at the bottom that Mindy just highlighted, phases of continuous learning for educators, that opens up a document which I think I'm just a little bit proud of it because I think it's pretty ingenious the way we kind of thought through this. We divided it into 4 phases, and then we created these like questions that you might want to think about, and we're going to go into that more deeply. But we really felt like we needed a home base we needed a place to start from where we could kind of see the big picture all at once. And this is what this home base has become. Now, I'm going to quit talking because I've already talked a lot and kind of hand it over to the rest of you ladies.
All right, I'm going to pick it up from here. Thanks for the great introduction, Beth. Uh, and using the word home base, because we thought about these as 4 different phases that you'll probably be moving through as you gain strength with your online learning. And I'm going to start off by talking about phase 1. And phase 1, I think, connects back to us as educators as those first couple days in your classroom. Typically what you think of as fall time, of what are we doing to establish and create culture and community with our students. Even though we've been with them for several months, and now we have not been with them for a couple of months, we need to go about establishing and creating a new online culture and community for our students to navigate and work within. Part of that is going to be establishing routines and figuring out kind of explanations for them as to why they're doing or working in some specific areas or using some specific tools. But really, asking, as it boils down to in our first phase of trying to connect with our students, of where am I going to, as the teacher, be putting information for you to find? So what is our virtual home base going to be as an educator? And then on top of that, where am I going to connect with you? Like right now, Beth and Mindy and Corey and I are all connecting through Zoom. So that would be a place or a way that I know many teachers are using to connect with their students virtually, but I may be putting resources or materials for you somewhere else. So what is going to be that virtual home base for you? And so I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues right now and to all of you that are watching. Why do we think it would be important for us to have one place for students to access? Or maybe what are some of the benefits that you've experienced by having a home base?
So I think that's a really interesting question, Amber, because I know, especially when this all first started, that there was kind of a like a mad dash scramble of communication. And so I think that we were trying to get in touch with everyone in all of the different ways. And I imagine that there can be some frustration felt. I know for me, I feel this way too, that if I were to have to check my email and then also have to check a Google Doc and have to go to a site. And if I had to try not only to deal with the emotion of the situation that I'm going through, but also trying to navigate lots of different platforms, it can be kind of frustrating and maybe a bit overwhelming. And so having a home base, I think, that is accessible to all of our students, that is somewhat attainable for our parents who maybe have very little experience in dealing with something like that, maybe helps just take a little bit of stress away from the situation. And that's, I guess, one of the reasons why I think that a home base is really important, especially for my students who are my kids here at my house, one that they can do independently while I'm working and on Zoom calls in the morning.
I also think about it as from the perspective, if I'm a parent and I have kids in multiple schools and multiple classrooms, I think that having a very clear home base makes the parents kind of process easier because they're acting in navigating in ways they haven't probably had to do before. And so it just, there's a lot to think about if you're bopping all over the place. And I don't know, I tend to put all of my junk in my house in the same place every time. And it's not that my area has to be neat and tidy, but I know that all of my stuff is in this one area. I think we need to do that online for our kids as well.
Yeah, I think for
really
me
good point,
and for me and my kids, it's about that, helping kids with executive functioning, right? So I don't know that we've done a lot of modeling with having to keep track of all these documents because we get to see kids every day. And so we can help them with being organized and coming up with a system. And I am a parent that has students in 2 different buildings, and I have a middle schooler. And so we made our own home base to start, because I think it was like Mindy and Amber were saying, like, we're getting emails from all the different teachers with different resources and just trying to make sense of that, but also recognize, especially for middle schoolers, letting my daughter have autonomy and be in control of some of that, we needed a system. And so I think home bases help both families and kids feel like they kind of have some of that control over what's happening and where they can find information so that they can engage and feel productive in this really volatile time, like Beth was saying.
Yeah. I think it's important to know, like, as we were thinking through this, a lot of this has been sprinting at times to get through, right? And so we're like, oh my gosh, now I need to go and talk and try to touch base with every one of my students, or now I need to do this. And some of those things might have happened really quickly. One of the things that we advocated for in that first question in phase one is that, you know, maybe it'd be awesome to create like just a simple one pager that you could share out as your place as a teacher with parents and students, so that everybody knows where your home base is and you don't have to go searching through the world for it. And then really also kind of thinking about that connection place. A home base could be simple as, you know, a Google Drive folder that you're going to drop things into, but you want to have the connection of being able to talk to each other. And so you've probably learned some very interesting things about your students during this time, and how they are online learners as compared to how they were in the classroom. And so it'd be really curious to kind of hear from you guys in the comments about what are some things that you've learned about your students through this whole process. I think that we always need to be talking and we always need to be connecting with them to see how it's going for them, whether we're doing that face-to-face synchronous or asynchronous. And in that second question that we have in phase one, we think about all of those different ways that you can connect with people virtually together at the same time, or maybe in an asynchronous way, meaning that I put a question out into the world, and then when you have time and when you have space, then you get the opportunity to respond to it.
Yeah, and one other thing I didn't want to interrupt you, Amber, but I think an important thing when you were kind of talking about that one pager is how important it is to be able and willing to troubleshoot from afar for parents. So a lot of things that I'm seeing, especially you guys know how involved I am with Seesaw and kind of keeping track of that stuff, is that it feels like there's a lot of troubleshooting that has to happen from a distance. And so you have to, you know, be able to send out a one pager of directions for your parents, because think about a kindergartner right now who's trying to navigate some of this stuff on their own and doesn't have the life experience of knowing like, well, did you close the app and did you open it back up? We have parents that feel that same way about things too, right? So how important it is to be able to give some of those tools to parents so that they can feel successful with their students.
Absolutely. And I feel like hopefully if you take a look at our phase one doc and really any of the docs within there, we've tried to build within there some help places that they could go out to and maybe share back with families or teachers or students, or really thinking about student expectations in this virtual world. I mean, we're teaching in a virtual world, right? Or this isn't what we would necessarily call digital learning, which is the brand that we like to talk about ourselves as of digital learning. We think that digital learning has a bunch of face-to-face time incorporated with it, but this is all out there, right? So it's a whole
Yeah,
new.
it's very different than what we imagine digital learning looks like in a face-to-face or in, you know, brick and mortar building for sure.
So AJ Giuliani has called this emergency remote learning. And I think I've really grabbed onto that emergency piece of it because of like what you're saying, like we are sprinting to get to this place. Now, when we know this is going to be our life for at least the next month, it kind of looks a little bit different. So maybe that's a good way to take us into the next phase, phase two. That's my phase. I think that this phase is really about the student, how the student is interacting with this online world. And so I love all the things that Amber said about having students, giving them opportunity to share their voice. I think that that is a very, very important part of this phase. To me, it's sort of about big picture thinking. So you've created this home base, you've got this space. Now, what are you going to do in that space? So it's being able to create a place where you're going to put some stuff in it. It's about communication, setting communication goals for students, and really realizing, I think, that communication is the key in this entire process. I think that the success or the failure of this emergency remote learning is communication. And as I said in the very beginning, I think as teachers, when we're stressed, we tend to close in, which means that we give less and less ownership, I think often, over to our students because we feel like we need to control it all. This is really a chance for us to think about things in a different way and to maybe think about how could students be a part of the solution to this kind of time we're living in. An article that I read talked about how the students, this principal, when there were issues in school, he would often invite the students that were part of the issue to help creatively solve the problem. Instead of telling the students what's going to happen, he would bring them back in and they'd talk about a way to solve it. And I think that that's a really fantastic model for what this period of time is also. Making sure that we're giving students chance for feedback and creating some really clear feedback loops to find out what is working and what is not working. We're really focusing on the communication and helping students figure out how they're going to learn online. One of the things that we've been hearing in Iowa right now, as schools have moved from voluntary to, is it called required? Is that the right terminology? Okay,
yeah.
From voluntary to required, where students, their expectations have changed, and we need to figure out, make sure that we're helping them understand what that means, that the expectations have changed, and how the processes need to change also. So my question really is to all of us, how have we seen pathways for students to give feedback that have been successful, and or ways that teachers have really used that feedback to tweak the process to meet the needs of their students in a different way? So I'd be interested to hear from any of you folks, even with your own students. One of the other things that we talked about, Corey and I were working on this phase together. And one of the other things that we talked about a lot is the fact that when you are a teacher, we tend to get really focused, especially secondary teachers, and think about, I'm teaching this course, and not thinking about the fact that the student has all these other courses also. So it's also about looking at the big picture of what this learning looks like for students, not just my course, but their entire life online. So I'm curious, what kinds of things have you seen, heard, experienced out in the wilds or with your own kids?
I read a blog post from a teacher who put out a Google form that was anonymous and basically said, I need 3 pieces of advice to help be a better online teacher, and what kind of advice can you give me? And it was really interesting to see they published the results and everything, to have that be a part of the conversation, and to just be really open and vulnerable about asking that question to your teacher or to your students, so that they can really be a big part of that conversation.
I love that.
Yeah, it takes a lot of guts, right? It takes a lot of guts to put yourself out there and be like, hey, tell me what you need from me. Because we are masters of our craft, truly, as educators, we take a lot of pride in what we do. Teaching is deeply personal to all of us. We are in it for personal reasons. And then to put yourself out there and be like, hey, tell me what I need to do better, that's really hard. I have had a couple conversations with teachers here and there, and they're just like, I don't know. I don't know if what I'm doing is enough. And I try to keep saying, you're enough. You know, you have to give yourself some grace here, give your kids your students some grace, give everybody just needs a lot of grace right now. So if you can put yourself out there and ask for feedback from your parents, from your students, I think everybody is being a little bit softer with one another right now. And so if you're going to ask for feedback, now's the time, right? We're preaching everybody be more kind. Now's the time to get some advice and get some feedback.
I mean, we're building this as we go. So this is our customer service moment.
Right.
I think for my own kids, part of that feedback has come from tools like Flipgrid, or just from attending a Zoom meeting and having those conversations virtually with their teachers, is where they're getting some feedback from the kids, that the amount of engagement that's happening, but then also just directly asking them in the Zoom meetings. Like my middle school daughter, many of her meetings with her teachers have been social emotional check-ins. There's not content, it's getting to see classmates, and then the teacher saying like, how is everybody doing? And I think like Mindy was saying, giving ourselves grace to just have it be that. We don't have to have content, we don't have to have an activity. Sometimes it's enough to just check in and talk to each other and engage with each other emotionally.
All right, should we move it along?
Yes.
We're ready. Okay, so that I'm going to go back to the home base here just so you guys can see where we're at. Next phase is phase 3. And to be completely honest with you, as educators, you know, when we first started talking about this phase 3, I imagined in my head that I would be absolutely impressed and thrilled if any teachers by the end of May got to the point where they were really working on and have, you know, created things online for their students to communicate and collaborate with one another. So I am very aware that this is a big step, because if you weren't doing it digitally in your classroom to begin with, then doing it online in this situation is going to be challenging. So that being said, looking a little bit to the checklist on the left, you might be ready to start doing some of these things with your students if you already are sharing content online with activities that you feel like are engaging for your students and that you're getting response back about. If you have also kind of already talked about what are your expectations online for your students, are you going to be you know, do you have some specific expectations, or is it very voluntary and what you choose is how this work, you know, is how you engage as a student? So I would say those are 2 important factors that you really need to have in place before you move on to really structuring some communication and collaboration amongst students. Another important part of phase 3 is not only the communication and collaboration skills. We talked a little bit about in phase 2, Beth talked about feedback and getting feedback from your students to find out, is this working for them? But as students are starting to turn in work to you and to show what they know, we have to have ways to digitally provide feedback for our students as well, which might not be something that you've done in the past either. So what does good feedback look like digitally for our students? How do we make sure that tone is read correctly? If you know me at all, tone is constantly a problem for me. I have the worst case of sarcasm in my life, like in the world. So I always have to be very clear that people read my sentences as I intend, exactly how I intend. Either way, it could go either way always. So it's important, I think, to definitely have some of those tools in place to make sure that students can understand your tone and that you're providing the right types of feedback to move students forward in their thinking and their learning. So those are some big components to instruction and maybe things that you haven't done in the past. And I think that's why phase 3 to me is a pretty big hop. If you are, you know, sending out links to your students and saying, take a minute to think about this or create something, going to the point where students are collaborating with one another and providing feedback for one another, you're providing feedback for them, that's a different level. So if you're thinking about that, I guess my question is for our viewers and also for my colleagues here, what challenges or obstacles do you foresee in this type of phase for our educators? And then I'd like you to solve all of those problems in about 3 sentences. You could just do that, would be great.
There's a sarcasm. So my colleagues have heard me say this before. I think a hard part about this goes back to what Amber was saying with building culture in phase 1. But I know for my own kids, if the physical environment didn't feel safe, you've got to make sure that now that we're digital, that kids feel safe engaging with each other and receiving and giving feedback to each other. And so I think kind of circling back and making sure that the culture is okay and that kids feel comfortable with that is really important for this to be meaningful and for them to not only give productive feedback, but then receive it. And as a middle school teacher, that was what I spent a lot of my time in my classroom doing, was making sure that we had a culture where kids felt comfortable not only giving each other feedback, but then getting feedback from me. And that's tricky online. I think we've got to give ourselves time to figure out what that looks like and then continue to nurture it so that once we have that trust, it stays there. I don't have a solution. Sorry, NIMBY.
Oh, well, okay.
I mean, I was just even thinking about some of the nitty gritty, like asynchronous feedback is tricky because if you're not all doing it at the same time, it's hard to plan. If you are one of the first people to post on an answer and you're supposed to respond and there's nobody there yet, and like all of that, they need practice in what that means and what it looks like and what the process is. It's not, asynchronous is not the world we normally live in because we live in immediate. So all of that just takes time and practice and grace. I mean, I think that that's the other thing, and we just have to keep saying that over and over and over.
Right. And so I guess my follow-up question then is, so the other thing I would say, kind of like what you said, Beth, is that if we're asking kids, communication definitely is an issue when it's synchronous, and asynchronous collaboration is even more of an issue because you have to be able to match up schedules with a student who might be taking care of siblings at home, or maybe is considered an essential worker because they work at Hy-Vee or something like that and are helping out family by putting in some extra hours right now. There are lots of different situations. And if we're asking students to collaborate, you know, what does that look like? And so I guess my follow-up question is, what are some tools that you know of? And I know we didn't want to make this too tooly, but what are some really awesome tools out there that maybe would help students collaborate and communicate, but asynchronously, not synchronously?
I think Robin has a good point from our chat here. And, you know, when we think about those tools, but we also got to think that the kids have to be comfortable sharing just in general, right? Like putting yourself out there. I know that's a conversation that we've all had many times about doing that. And so how can we find a tool that maybe makes it really easy to have that happen?
And then I think pairing that tool with the strategy you use in your classroom. Do you provide question stems or sentence stems? Do you, like I used to use a strategy called tag. So tell them something you like, ask a question, give a suggestion. Like, are we utilizing some of those teaching strategies along with the technological tool to help kids? Because I think, like Robin said, to me, providing question stems in middle school especially was really a great way to help them build skills to give each other meaningful feedback, and also safe feedback. It wasn't like, this sucks. Well, no, that's not helpful. A, it's hurtful, and B, it doesn't help me like fix anything. It doesn't tell me what I need to focus on improving. And so I think kind of making sure that you're pairing a technological tool with a teaching strategy that you know works is an important piece.
And Robin has also put out there about using Flipgrid and Google Classroom as well, about using maybe those two things in tandem.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we've done some Flipgrid work already. So if you're wondering what Flipgrid is, you can definitely go back and find that in our Facebook Live feed. And I think Amber is moderating the chapter, so we didn't have that link, but maybe she can pull that up quick too. There are some other resources as well on this doc, as far as we mentioned feedback stems. I don't know if there's anything about essential questions in here. I know it's mentioned, but I'm not sure there's a link or anything, but there are lots of tools in here to kind of help with some of those things too.
Great.
All right.
We think we're ready for phase 4?
Yes.
The final phase.
The final phase.
Da, 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 da.
So phase 4, I feel like is real aspirational, because like Amber was saying, we're in a sprint right now. And to me, phase 4 is more about the marathon. So yeah, we're just putting that out there to start. But phase 4, you're not going to enter into that until you've established expectations for communication, collaboration for kids, like we're talking about in phase 3, and then that you've established some sort of procedure for providing feedback to students from the teacher. But once you've done that, phase 4 is really focused on a refined system of instruction, but then also providing differentiated online learning. And so this is where our colleague Maggie gets really excited, because we talk about universal design for learning, or UDL, but making sure that you are not only gathering feedback from students, like Beth was saying, about how this is going and what needs to be improved, but that you're also collecting and using instructional feedback. So just like in your classroom, those PLC questions, if students aren't getting it, what are you going to do to help them? But then also being really mindful about, when you're providing instructional resources, that there's multiple ways for kids to interact. So if it's in written form, is there also a video version? Is there an audio version? Is there closed captioning for learners that might need that? Have you scaffolded the content so that kids have different entry points? And so I think this is really hard, because we're still trying to get our feet under ourselves with what this looks like. But once you feel like you've got a pretty solid foundation, what we have in the document are some questions and some resources for you to think about. Is, okay, so now that I feel comfortable, how is it that I'm really planful about making sure I'm meeting the needs of my learners, and that I'm using the feedback that I see about their learning to inform what the next step is, or what the next resource is to help kids move ahead. So the question I have for my colleagues this time is, I'm wondering, what are some ways that we're seeing teachers provide some choice for students, or provide multiple modes for them to engage in content?
Beth Swans, are you going to take this one away, or?
Yeah, I was thinking.
Okay. I mean, I can hop in, but it's not going to be nearly as good as what you have to say.
Well,
So
I don't know about that, but we work a lot with teachers that are moving toward a more blended and personalized stance for teaching, which is all about providing choice for students. We see a lot of choice boards, which can be as simple as a tic-tac-toe with multiple resources. So providing different ways to get for students to get to the same content. That works really well in like all different kinds of formats. If you've never looked at HyperDocs, I would suggest that as a simple entryway. HyperDocs have kind of a process of introducing a content, and there's digital links throughout to take students to different ways of learning and different ways of demonstrating their learning. Choice boards I mentioned, and online menus. We see teachers using a lot of different resources to offer this, and providing differentiation in the way that they offer it. From color coding different tasks, you're going to do all the blue ones, you'll do all the yellow ones, you'll do all the pink ones, or choose a yellow, a blue, and a pink. All those different ways of sort of organizing content that gives students a bit more ownership. So as Corey said, this is an aspirational thing. And the part that I find the most difficult is I work a lot with teachers to move to this place, but the teacher is there talking to the students side by side as we're getting to this place. So there's ongoing feedback with facial expressions, with just anxiety level. All of that can happen in a classroom. It's super hard for that to happen in the Zoom world or the Google Hangout world, because I have 20 faces in front of me and I can't monitor all of them. So I think that we have to be really transparent and help students realize that we meaning teachers, are trying to figure this out as we go, and be willing to continue to negotiate and tweak the process so that it meets the needs of our students. And I feel like that's the bottom line here, is how are we meeting the needs of our students? How are we making sure that the kids that need more, I can give them more? How are we making sure that the kids that are struggling, I can reduce the amounts? And I would just put a plug in for priority standards, because priority standards helps you know what you've already decided are the most important things in your classroom. So that's what you're going to put your focus on. And it helps you realize what are the other things that can kind of fall away. Okay, that was a lot.
I think it's good what you said, though. I I could see we're offering choice for a teacher that maybe hasn't done that, especially digitally already in prior practice. What I would say, the advice I would offer would just be to just only provide 2 choices, right? You don't have to, I mean, I know we say choice board and we say bingo board or tic-tac-toe board, and that's like 9 choices, right? Or all these different choices. Try just to do it for a day and do two choices instead. Would you like to read this, or would you like to watch it? Or would you like to read it or listen to it? And then, like you said, ask for feedback and find out what's working, and then you would better know what kind of things to offer your students too if you're getting feedback from them. If you have no one who's interested in listening to it, then you know that, oh, maybe this isn't something I have to worry about right now. I need to come up with a different platform to offer this content.
And I've heard that feedback from teachers often. They've put a lot of energy into creating this amazing whatever it is. And their students don't want to make choices. They just want to be told, here's what you need to do next. That's when you're standing in front of them. I think that it gets even more murky when you're not standing in front of them. So this is a hold lightly right now, I think.
And don't you think part of it that when Corey introduced this phase, she said that it's, a goal phase, right? To get to a place to get to, but that when we do live in kind of this digital world right now, that there's a lot of digital resources out there that can really help to supplement those choices, whether it's Grantwood online resources, or if it is a tool that allows there to be choice built within it, that's the time that we can play around with those sorts of things.
Absolutely.
Have we solved the world's problems today?
Without a doubt.
That was a resounding no, but okay.
Some of them, maybe.
Maybe.
I hope that at least gave some clarity to our continuous learning plan, right?
Right. We keep referencing it, but never really talked about it. And so at least now, if you're interested, you can go in and look. The other thing I would say is that if you're using this document, you'll see at the top of each page, contact your digital learning consultant. This really is, I think, a guide, but we want to be the guide on the side for you. So if you are working through this work, you're not alone. We want to support you. We want to help you however we can. So reach out to us either in the comments or email one of us, and we will either, maybe one of us is your consultant, or we'll direct you to in the right direction. But we really want to help you as much as we can to be successful.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
And I would say, speaking of that, tomorrow our team has another webinar to help you be successful. So tomorrow, April 28th at 11:30, we'll be back on Facebook Live to talk about using Edpuzzle to help students engage with video content.
And Amber and I are going to be with you to do some of that with our colleague Gina. So we'll be back.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Monday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.